Hi, everybody. This is Loren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal, and welcome to today's Search Engine Journal show, brought to you by Ahrefs and Adzuma. With me today, I have Eli Schwartz, author of Product-Led SEO. How's it going, Eli?
It's going well here, holding up the book. Got it right behind me. Hey, it's great to be with you, Loren. I've got a tremendous amount of gratitude for SEJ. Like SEJ, kicked off so many things for me.
Really?
I don't know if I ever told you this, but I wrote my first blog post. Oh, it's got to be 11, 12 years ago on SEJ. Don't dig it up. It's probably absolutely horrible. And it was the first real thing I wrote since college. So now I wrote a book. I've got 260-ish pages in my book, and I swear it all started with me formulating thoughts on SEJ.
That is amazing. So we got that snowball started.
You totally did.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Well, congratulations. First of all, congratulations for making the right decision on getting started writing and putting your thoughts together and putting together a piece for SEJ years and years and years ago. And congratulations for that ultimately becoming a book. So I'm really happy we were able to lead you down that path.
I appreciate it. It was, SEJ real and then I continued that process of writing to still write for SEJ and big part of my writing life in general.
Nice. That's great to hear, man. That's great to hear. So for those that are listening or watching today, could you introduce yourself and give a little bit of background? Because I was going through your LinkedIn profile to look at all of your history and places that you've worked or consulted for. It's a pretty amazing list.
Yeah, I feel really lucky. I have to go all the way back to the beginning of my SEO career. I was I started my career at a company where I was not responsible for SEO. I was responsible for sales and working with webmasters as affiliates. And I got a hold of Aaron Wall's SEO book. Oh, wow. I was like, "Ooh, this is cool. I'd rather be doing that." And I read Bruce Clay's SEO for Dummies, that going all the way back, and the Yahoo Site Explorer, and started figuring out SEO. And then I don't know if LinkedIn was a big deal then, but I definitely changed my resume and I changed my title to SEO. That's what I was doing. And I started applying for new SEO jobs, and I didn't have any idea what I was talking about. But the best thing was that nobody else had any idea what they were talking about either. And I finally landed one of those gigs where I was working at this startup. I was responsible for SEO, and was able to I was there for a few years. And then I went over to SurveyMonkey, where I spent most of my career. I was there almost 7 years. And the reason I say I'm super fortunate is because I worked at a brand that everyone knows. Everyone knows SurveyMonkey, and I was able to leverage that into consulting for the cool brands you see on my LinkedIn. Everyone wanted to know how do you do SEO at scale? How do you do SEO at a big company? And I started helping out companies on the side. And then, that sort of planted the seed in my head. Is hey, maybe I could just do the side as a full-time job. I'm just going to consult. I'm just going to help companies essentially do what I did at SurveyMonkey, which is take a little bit of traffic and turn it into hundreds of millions of dollars in sustainable revenue, and do that for as many companies as I have bandwidth for. So really fortunate that I worked with some really cool brands, helping them to strategize and understand SEO and build out sustainable SEO and build out teams. And that's really my career. I don't think I'm better at any area of SEO than all the other writers and all the other people out there in SEO. I'm just fortunate that I get a chance to play in those big leagues and try what I know.
So SurveyMonkeys are really so when I go through all of these companies that are on your resume, right? Coinbase, Gusto, WordPress. I wouldn't call WordPress a startup. Zendesk, but a lot of Bay Area companies that kind of exploded right out of the gate. When I think of SurveyMonkey, I was around when SurveyMonkey launched. That is not an overnight success, right? So what did you learn working for a company like SurveyMonkey that had been around for a long time, and then suddenly it kind of became a 2.0 style company, and then applying that to kind of new startups and stuff like that? Because growth at SurveyMonkey took time, but it really escalated around 8 years ago, it seemed right? So how do you apply what you learned over that long period of time to something like Coinbase, which is a year or two old?
Right. No, so that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to take those learnings that I had at SurveyMonkey. It was when I first started consulting, I was talking to big companies, and they were asking me how do we do this, and how do we think about SEO? And they would ask me about links. And I think links are, of course, an important part of the algorithm, but
Right.
for a lot of the brands that I've worked for, links are not important because they're just massive brands. And I just felt like the CMOs and chief product officers and VPs of growth, like they were just sort of being myopic and tactical when it came to SEO, and they had this very narrow understanding of what SEO is. They're like, to them, it was title tags and links. And to me, it was a lot of the things I learned at SurveyMonkey, which is like team structure and long-term roadmaps and building in metrics and building out analytics teams and like the stuff you need to do at SurveyMonkey. So that's what it really was. Like when I joined SurveyMonkey, I was coming from a startup where if I came up with an SEO idea, I turned to the engineer that was like 5 feet from me and I said, can we do it? And he said, we're releasing on Thursday. I just did it. And then I go to SurveyMonkey and I'm like, hey, here are the basic things we should do. Like there was an insane amount of low-hanging fruit. Like you said, SurveyMonkey's around for a really long time. I joined in 2012. The company started in 1999, and from 99 to like 2009, they're a really old company. They were just a small company of a dozen people. In 2009, they were acquired by private equity, and they started really investing in the company and the product. And then I joined in 2012. They had never ever done SEO, except they had all this brand value. Everyone knew SurveyMonkey, and everyone was searching for SurveyMonkey, and they had zero non-branded search traffic, except for a few terms. Those terms were like survey and surveys. And on top of that, they internationalized the entire site into 16 languages, and there was no international search because everything was on non-indexed subdomains. So that was the situation I came into. Like literally, I was like, oh wow, there's like, I can do a million things here. Every best practice is wrong. And then I went over to engineers, and like, this is like on the first page of my book. Like I went over to engineers and I said, can we do this? And the engineer just shot me down harder than I'd ever been shot down in my entire life. He's like, no, marketing doesn't get to tell engineers what to do. And this specific thing was like, it was a very basic fix. Like to me, it's like, hey, we do this. It takes 10 minutes of your time and we grow. And to him, it's like, you're not on my team. You're not a product manager. You're just like an SEO, and I don't have any respect for SEO. We're not going to do that. So that really caused me to change my entire approach to like how SEO is done. And SurveyMonkey got bigger and it got more challenging. And that's really what I put in my book is like, how do you win friends and how do you get them to do things and how do you explain it to executives and how do you build out the long-term product roadmap that drives revenue? Where, you know, when I coming from where I'd come from before, I had just focused on keywords like many people in SEO, and at SurveyMonkey, no one cared. It didn't bother anyone whatsoever that we did not rank in Germany, despite the fact that they had built, you know, spent millions of dollars translating the site and building a marketing site in Germany. Like it wasn't a concern to them. So I had to convince them I was concerned. I could get the resources to do that. And so that's what I learned. And that's what I wrote in the book. And like, that's what I bring on the road, like to, you know, the companies I work with right now, which is whenever I have an initial conversation with a company, it's just like, we want SEO. We want more. Like, we think it's a good thing. It's important for us. Our investors want it and we want to do it. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? Does it even make sense? Probably 75% of the time, I tell companies that I can't work with them because there is no real reason they should do SEO. Like, yes, they can optimize title tags, but it doesn't justify a consulting engagement, doesn't justify hiring an agency, doesn't justify hiring full-time employees. I like working with companies where SEO is going to be a big channel and there's a lot they can do from a product and engineering standpoint. So that's what I bring to companies now, and that's what I brought to the companies on my LinkedIn is there's an opportunity. They don't know the opportunity. They're not going after the right opportunity because they don't know how to, but they have the right resources in place if someone were to help them to get there.
Do you end up saying no sometimes to consulting gigs because they don't have that set up, or they're not, like someone has said, and maybe the CMO is like, hey, we're the VP of marketing, we need to get our SEO in order. And then you start talking to them, you talk to the development teams, and they're just not connected. Like, do you ever say no to those kinds of situations?
Yeah, all the time. I said no this morning to a company that raised like $10 million. They raised $10 million and they just want growth, but they've never done any paid marketing. And like, it's a B2B company. I don't see how they're ever going to need SEO, but in the meantime, I'm like, do paid marketing, figure out who your user is, and maybe then it makes sense to like make a bet on SEO. Like from my experience at enterprises, it takes 12 to 18 months to really see the results of that effort.
Yeah.
As a startup, like, why would they make a 12 to 18 month bet if they don't even know if there's an SEO user there? Go do paid, go figure out who the user is to begin with, make some money, And then they say, we've got all this cash flow. Yeah, why not? We'll try this SEO thing, but don't do it from the start. And another one, it was a public company, thousands of employees. They two-sided marketplace. I was talking to the chief digital officer of one side of their marketplace, and we're having like the initial conversation. We're discussing how much consulting would cost. And I asked a very basic question, which I thought was basic. I just said, how many engineers do you have that are going to be resourced SEO this year? And the guy says, well, they're not on my team, but the CEO is very, very bought into SEO and will definitely listen to our requests. So I may have left and ruined that deal. And so they ghosted me after that. But that, to me, that's like they could hire me, but they were never going to accomplish anything if all we're going to do is build pretty decks and say, can we pretty please have someone do this? And then they'd be like, well, they're busy. They're doing other stuff, so we'll do it another time. Like that wouldn't be a successful engagement for me or them.
So for anyone that's listening right now that is a consultant, right, or they're looking to get into consultancy, maybe they're coming from a company where they've traditionally had that support and they're like, hey, I can do this for everybody, right? What are some things to look out for besides not having communication with the CTO or with engineers to actually work on a project? And how can consultants and agencies pre-qualify before bringing on a client like that to make sure that, you know, the recommendations are actually going to be done? And at the end of the 1 year engagement, 18-month engagement, 2 year engagement, you're not getting that question saying, hey, how come I paid you such and such and such and we don't rank anymore? We see no ROI on this. What can they look into?
Yeah, so the thing I always try to do in initial conversations is to try to understand who the user is. Like, is a user going to be Googling for them? And can they articulate what it is that someone should be searching for and what happens after that search happens? So for B2B companies, we talk through like the process. And like, I got to this point where I struggled to ever want to work with B2B companies because I've worked with many of them and they were not successful engagements. So I'll ask them, like, what do you want from Google? And they're like, well, we have white papers and we want people to fill out leads. So that's a content play. I like that. Right. For a content play, for like really growing a blog out, it doesn't justify paying me as a consultant. You don't need an engineer for that. You need a blogger. You need, an outsourced blogger even. So that having that initial conversation really helps flesh it out. And the other one is like, what sort of metrics are they looking for and what can you as a consultant deliver? So this has happened to me on a few occasions where the way I pitch my consulting and start talking to companies as if I'm an internal asset to them. I'm external, but I'm an internal asset where I'm going to be a part of the team. They're going to include me in all the emails. Maybe I'll get an email address. Maybe I'll be on their Slack. Where I try to find out what is it that they're looking for, and as we build this partnership together, I get this unique advantage in that they share all the other pitch decks from every other agency that they've talked to, because I'm a part of the team, even if they don't hire me. So one thing I've seen is like all those like big 3-letter agencies out there, they have these like long decks and they really focus on page speed. So I get that like agencies love page speed because it's one of the very few red, yellow, green things you can do. It's
very sellable right now.
Totally. But there's absolutely nothing the agency can do to make that page speed faster, especially at some of these big companies. Like there's a company I was working with, they're an analytics company and they have an analytics script on millions of websites around the world. And one of those big 3-letter agencies gave them a pitch deck that was very focused on page speed. Like this company, for them to increase their page speed, like they have data centers because they have analytics and they have scripts that run on every website all over the place. That's not an easy sell. Like what are they they're going to have to get the CIO to really buy into this. And that's unlikely. So why would you come in and say, I'm going to improve your SEO because we're going to improve page speed? That is not something that an agency can control. And in fact, I pointed out to them that all their competitors had similar page speed problems, so they don't have to be as concerned with it. But that's what I would say. It's like, figure out what the metrics they're looking for and figure out what needles you can move or if you can even move them.
So you're really getting in, like you're sliding into the DMs of the company that you're working with. Like you're becoming part of the team, almost like companies that I've worked with in the past that have done things like they'll sign up for Salesforce, CRM, right? And then they'll sign up for Salesforce CRM, but there's no one at Salesforce to actually help them integrate that. So they have to go and they have to get a Salesforce consultant to help them integrate that. And that consultant ends up working within the company, working with the engineers things like that. And I don't see that many SEOs actually doing that from an outside perspective. I know some of the companies that I work with, I have the ability to do, and sometimes that takes trust. It takes time as well, right? So, what are the steps to kind of get that, like even to get an email? Because like from an outreach perspective, I love having a client email, but that scares almost everybody internally to be able to give an outside contractor, an agency, an email address. What are some ways that you really not convince, but win and build trust in your expertise that some of our listeners and viewers could implement?
So I love that you bring it up because it helps me pivot over to something that I pitch all the time on social media, which is in-house hiring is completely broken, right? Like there's so many people that are looking for tactical SEOs to hire. They want to underpay them, which is something I had tweeted just earlier today. They want, and that's based on like a bunch of like I love helping people find new jobs. So I see how much people get paid and I see how much people are willing to pay. And for me, it's just like a matchmaking, friends helping friends. And like if I can help anybody get a job, DM me, send me a resume. I've got all these. There are plenty of places are hiring. It's one of the best places that companies are looking for right now. They want to scale SEO. So I think in-house is broken. They're looking for tactical people when really they want strategic people. So in that strategic space, there aren't a lot of SEOs that will fill that gap because the tactical folks don't get promoted into the strategic roles. So they move on to the other tactical roles. And you're not promoting enough people to really learn that skill set. On the agency side, it's hard to have that strategic view when you haven't been a part of a company. So that's where I've been able to slide in as a part of a company because ideally they want to hire a strategist. They're harder to find. And more strategists are actually going off on their own. Like I just reached out to strategists to try to, introduce them to clients. And he, on his LinkedIn, he was still at this company, but he told me he's been consulting for the last year. So like, there's so many people that like they can make so much more money and be so much more efficient and have a better work-life balance if they're consulting. So the companies I've worked with, and the reason they give me an email address is because ideally they want to hire a full-time. I'm the next best option. So I'll go through the typical vetting process almost as if I'm being hired full-time, where like I'll meet I'll meet the project owner who will introduce me to their boss, who will introduce me to their boss. On occasion, I've been background checked. On occasion, I've been given a computer. On worse occasions, I've had to go through onboarding. Actually, I like those occasions. So when I have to go
through HR, do you have to go through HR?
Yeah, my contract starts and I start billing them on a retainer, but I can't do anything because I haven't been onboarded, which is fine, right? Like it's a long-term project. I try to do everything on a year basis. So that's how I come in. It's not like deliverable based. I'm going to give you an audit and then I'm going to walk away. It's really like, we don't know what our goals are because you don't know what your goals are, but I'm going to work with the team and help you, project owner, figure out the goals. You don't need SEO expertise. I'm partnering with you. And I really don't think SEO is a 40-hour-week job at most companies. Maybe at Amazon it is, but at most companies it's not a 40-hour-week job. And like I know at SurveyMonkey, I don't know, I probably did like 10 hours a week of actual SEO when I did. So and the organizations know that. So like they're hiring my 10 hours a week, they're hiring my 5 hours a week, and I don't have to go to like the daily stand-up or the feel-good meetings or like the company outings. They want growth, they want success. And to them, it's easier to bring on a contractor. Like some of the gigs I had, it's very hard to hire. They have to get an open rec, but they can get contractors much easier. They can get year-long contractors. Like there was an engagement I had where I pitched a year-long contract, and they said we can only get approval from purchasing for 6 months, and then we'll turn it into another 6 months. But they didn't have a chance in hell of getting an actual full-time hire. So like that solves their problem. So I'm coming in feeling what ideally they want a full-time hire for, but I don't need to be, and they don't need me to be either.
Almost like a fractional CMO would, or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's not something that really exists in SEO yet, because the way most companies think of SEO is they just want someone to do tactical things, or they want deliverable. But I think we will get to a point where hopefully my book changes it. SEO is a product. You want someone with that expertise around building an SEO product. You can't hire them, so hire the fractional version.
I like that. There's a couple of reasons why. And I'm just giving this recommendation because not just because I'm a consultant as well, but because I think it's smart. I've worked with so many companies, especially in the Bay Area. But now it's all over the place. It's not regional specific anymore, where there's just a merry-go-round, right? There's a hiring phase. People come on, they have their position, and then 6 months later, 8 months later, even sometimes 3 months later, they're recruited. They leave. They go, right? And there's zero consistency. I've even been to the point where I'm looked upon as the historian of what the brand has done from an SEO and overall digital marketing perspective, because no one has left notes behind, right? No one has left that strategy or whatever it is. And it's really interesting to me too, because you had mentioned something in terms of purchasing, like budget to bring on a consultant, right? It's so much cheaper for companies to hire a consultant as opposed to really staffing out because of things like insurance benefit. I mean, of course, as a consultant, sometimes we want to have like things like stock options or whatever, but insurance benefits, stock options, whatever it is, as opposed to just paying somebody, boom, not having to take care of the taxes, not having to take care of this, not having to take care of that, but also having someone that can sit at the table and not have their direction or strategy or professional opinion influenced by internal company politics. In the same way that maybe someone would, if they are building out a Salesforce CRM or Microsoft licensing or IBM licensing, whatever it may be, having that external consultant come in and just not tell it like it is, but be able to bring that historic data-driven experience to the table that others at the company may not have. And it's extremely valuable.
And like for what you're talking about, the level of people that they can hire it gets much, much more narrow. Like and I've done this like on LinkedIn, where you look at like how many people in America, let's just keep it to the US, how many people have SEO in their LinkedIn with 1 to 2 years experience, and there's a lot of them. But now you start going to 5 years, and you start going to 10 years, and you start going, I think they cap out at 10. They're really not that many people. So I've seen this over and over. Like I'll out the company right here, right now, eBay. So I interviewed at eBay maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. It was for a VP of SEO role. So this is before I decided to go off on my own. This has actually convinced me to go off on my own. So it's a VP of SEO role. eBay's a big company, publicly listed. We all know eBay. We all used to use eBay. Many of us haven't logged into eBay in many years. So I go for this interview. They had a very, very small pool of candidates, and it was an external recruiter. I thought I did pretty well at the interview, and met everyone. We discussed strategy. We discussed like their low-hanging fruit, which is at a company like eBay is just literally everywhere. You walk around getting coffee, there's SEO low-hanging fruit. And then, a couple weeks later, the external recruiter gets back to me and he says, the team really loved you. The requirement for this job was that you have 10 years experience. Check, I got that. But they really are looking for someone that has managed a team of 20, which I had not, and I can struggle to find any SEO person that is still doing SEO, that's just doing SEO, that currently manages a team of 20, that's not an agency. And they really want someone who has experience at an e-commerce company that does $1 billion in revenue per month. Well, good luck with that, right? Like that doesn't exist. But so like, I don't know.
Want someone from Amazon.
That's pretty much it. Right? Like Amazon people aren't looking, they're happy.
Or Walmart, yeah.
Exactly. So like that's what I think is broken in like the entire SEO world. Is like everyone wants, and all you're talking about the Bay Area. There's so much money out there right now. And I talk to a lot of these companies, they like get massive rounds, which used to be $1 million for like a Series A or $5 million for a Series A. Now it's like $80 million for a Series A. So they want to hire a VP of growth and they have all these requirements, but everyone wants to hire a VP of growth and everyone wants SEO. And those people, there aren't that many people that exist. And that's where consultants can fill in the gap. And that's where they have to fill in the gap. Like if you want to do SEO and you want to hire, but you can't, your next best option is really a consultant that can hit the ground running. Like, you said like people go join these companies and they're gone in 3 months. That's relationship building. They spend the first 3 months, like, learning who the people are, learning what's behind each door, and then they leave. As a consultant, like I bring a lot of experience. And of course you do too. Like we've been in these companies before, the questions to ask. There are very few new things, regardless of what space something's in. And then, personality wise, and then you can hit the ground running a lot faster. So they can actually accomplish things like, let's say in the first month, you already know like, hey, here's what our goals are going to be. Whereas a new employee joins, the first month, they basically know who their boss is.
Right. I love that. I love that. Very cool. Very cool. Eli, we talked a lot about the Bay Area, but last time I actually saw you in real life was in the Bay Area at the Google Webmaster Conference. And I learned a little bit about you at that moment. I had no idea that you were from Baltimore originally.
Not proud
and you
of
went. Wait, what part of Baltimore?
Near Pikesville, but actually in Baltimore City.
Okay. Yeah. So I went to school there, grew up there, things like that. And then Maryland afterwards, right? You were at the University of Maryland. What took you to California? What took you to the Bay Area? What got you involved in that ecosystem, so to speak?
So I always wanted to live in Silicon Valley. So I studied entrepreneurship, and like any recent grad, I thought like the key, you study things and now you are an entrepreneur. You study marketing, now you are a marketer. And I didn't really know how to get started, and I didn't have my own startup idea. So I figured if I go to Silicon Valley, then maybe I'll have a shot at being an entrepreneur and being entrepreneurial and maybe being involved in a startup. And that was it. Like I took a bet. I went there, got a job in the first couple of weeks I was there, and it was off and running since then. Very, very grateful I took that leap. And it's actually the first of 2 times I did that. The second time I did that was I went over to Singapore. I wanted to learn international. I'd gotten very involved in international. Actually, I spoke at a couple SEJ summits on international. And
yes, you did.
Yes. Which SEJ really helped launch my speaking career. So thank you again for that.
Speaking and writing?
Speaking and writing. So much to be grateful to SEJ for. So I've been focused on international because I've been mistaken, and I'll take it back now. I thought international SEO was separate. It was a different thing. And now I've come to learn that international SEO is just SEO with international. It's like doing voice SEO. Voice SEO is you're doing SEO, but you just have a kind of angle on voice. And I think
like local everywhere. SEO is local. SEO is mobile.
Different enough. But international, I do think you don't necessarily need to be an international SEO expert. You can be an SEO expert and understand international. But at the time, I thought I wanted to learn more about international, and I convinced SurveyMonkey to send me to Singapore. So I took a similar bet, and I was like, I want to go, and I spent a couple of years there. So when my boss told me that was a crazy idea, I was like, I moved out to Silicon Valley to kind of the exact same thing. So I'm just doing it again.
I'm happy to hear that you picked Singapore. It's a very comfortable location to go and learn international SEO.
First world, and they speak English.
Yes. Very cool. So that's amazing. That's amazing. And I was going through your LinkedIn profile, and I see lots of mentor positions and mentorships. And let me kind of go through this list because it's really interesting. You're a mentor at GrowthX, a mentor at TechGrind Incubator in Thailand, a mentor at JFDI Asia in Singapore, DBS Bank in Singapore, lots of Singapore-oriented mentorships, Indonesia, Malaysia. So you really have taken this to the next level. Were you mentor on the ground in all these, doing all of this traveling, or doing more so via the web?
It's funny. I haven't even gone that far down on my LinkedIn profile in years. It all was on the ground. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about the tech ecosystem in Asia was that it was very focused on raising money. So they added me as a mentor because of the SurveyMonkey cachet, that they felt like, we have a Silicon Valley person here, so now it'll be easier for this incubator to raise money because we have a mentor. At the same time, the mentees that would reach out would be like, can we get a Silicon Valley connection? I can't say I ever answered a single SEO question in any of those mentorships. So
what do these mentorships typically consist of?
Getting my picture on their website.
Okay. Got you.
I am happy to mentor anybody if you reach out to me, but like for most of those things, it was really not. It was like, you work for a Silicon Valley company, can you be a mentor for us? And we'll fly you out to these places. My favorite one there was, it's called Magic in Malaysia. Barack Obama actually he cut the ribbon there and opened it up as some sort of partnership between Malaysia and the US. So I was a mentor there. They flew me out a couple times to speak. Very, very cool, smart people there. But most of it was getting my face on the website.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So tell us a little bit more about the book. Are there any chapters or sections of the book that you really want to highlight that we haven't had a chance to talk about today? What's something that if I was going to pick up product-led SEO and turn to one specific chapter, not necessarily the foreword or chapter one, where should I go? What's something that's really a highlight that people are talking about and people are asking you about?
So I talk a little bit or a lot about the things that happen within companies. And I love all the people that email me and reach out on social media and share that they have similar experiences where like just trying to convince people to do things and talking about long-term views. But to me, the most important part of the book, and which is it's the title and the reason I wrote the book, was I want to change the conversation on what SEO is. And what, to me, I call that product-led SEO. And it's not at all something I invented or coined. It's just a way of approaching SEO. So many people approach SEO from a keyword standpoint. They use Ahrefs, which I love, sponsors the show, and they find the top ranked keyword or the top searched keyword in their space, and then they zero in on that. Like, I'm going to build content around this keyword, and that's my SEO plan. What I call product-led SEO is taking many, many steps back and saying, why is a search user going to find us, and how is a search user going to experience our website? Is there a reason that we should exist and that Google should send search users to us? And when they find us, will they fall into some sort of funnel? And the examples I use in my book are companies like Zillow. So what Zillow did initially was they identified a gap in that space, in that real estate space, which is, and like I said earlier, I was working at this company, I was working with affiliates, so I worked with mortgage affiliates, and they wanted to generate—
Quinn Street?
Quinn Street.
Yeah.
They wanted to generate mortgage leads. Zillow upended that entire model and said, we want to generate mortgage leads too, but we're going to build a product around it. People are looking for, what does their house cost? What does their neighbor's house cost? And they aggregated all these sources and they built a product page, which is these addresses, which they rank on for every single address in America after Google. So after Google Maps is Zillow.
Change the game.
That's what I think of as a product. And earlier I said, like, I consult companies and help them to build out these products. Like, it doesn't fit for everyone, and it really doesn't fit for B2B companies. And there are many examples of what this is. Like, G2 is an example of product-led SEO. They built up products around the reason people are searching for it. Yelp is product-led SEO. Even Facebook is product-led SEO, because Facebook, they generate all this search, not just off of people's names, that's a product, but it's also over locations and over events. It's not, we're going to optimize for this event, this concert that's happening today, and we're going to put all our effort here, and we're going to throw this keyword everywhere. It's really, what do we create that users are now going to build their content in, and this is a product. So that's really why I wrote the book, because I think SEO should be that. Like, every time an algorithm changes, or, I have pieces on that as like how I approach algorithms, but there's all this like, I lost my rankings. And I worked with a company where every algo update, they lost rankings. They lost a ton of traffic, but the revenue went up. And the reason was because they had a crazy amount of dirty UGC, and the algo punished that dirty UGC, but the good part of their company was being hurt by other people who had dirty UGC, and Google would penalize that other dirty UGC. So their revenue generating pages actually went up in the algorithm, up in the SERPs, and they generated more revenue. So I think SEO needs to move away from this conversation of where am I ranking, what are my keyword focuses, but really about who are my users and why should I build for them. Like, I worked with a company, they had a blog. They spent $4 million on this blog, through external content and engineering, and the blog had never driven any revenue for them whatsoever, because that's like, people came to read it. They spun through page views. They maybe saw a banner, but there was no real profit potential is going to come from it. So that's
call to action.
Right. So I worked with them on building a product that made sense. When you search for them, you find that product, and now you're in a conversion funnel.
I love that. I love that so much, because I actually just had a conversation with a company about this. They, it's been the summer of Google updates. There's been a lot of spam updates. Whenever Google unleashes a spam update, spammy sites bubble up to the top, right? Because there's the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, turning the dial around just to see, what happens when you do this, and what happens when more links are allowed here, or whatever it is. It's not that simple, but it's kind of like that, right? So they bubble up, and you can usually tell the ones that are going to be cut out after a while. So they're like, what's going on here? right? There's all of these Google updates happening at once. We're losing to this company. I'm like, well, yeah, you're losing to this company this week. But if you look at the past 3 years, right, and compare your visibility score, right, and the revenue that you've brought in with search over your competitive set, who's been leading over that 3-year period, right? Who's been seeing consistent growth over that 3-year period? And yeah, you might have this one company pop up for 6 months, drop down a little bit, another one pops up and drops down, but you really, really have to look at the big picture. Chasing the rankings, chasing being number 1, number 3, number 6 is not going to get you anywhere. Of course, it's important. You want to be above the fold at the end of the day. You want to have visibility for the right pages, to your point about UGC. But at the same time, you really, really have to understand the big picture and what turns into revenue at the end of the day. It's as simple, even on the blog side, like you said, adding a call to action. When someone's done reading the blog, writing like a funnel, right? Taking that awareness and turning it into action at the end of the day. Putting a retargeting pixel on the blog. So if someone's learned about your brand, they trust your brand, retarget them. Maybe retarget them with the same topic matter that they were just reading about, right? Funnel them and get them to sign up for a newsletter and track all of that. When you're coming in and you're working with companies to really help them from a technical perspective, are you also looking at all the other marketing they're doing and seeing how that's going to help SEO at the end of the day as well? Because a lot of the time, there's so much going on between email. I mean, you've talked about a lot of this, right? Email, social media, even banner advertising, even press releases, whatever it may be, PR. And that's not necessarily connected. So sometimes it can just be a question of connecting those dots, almost like you did at SurveyMonkey with all of the different international sites and stuff like that, maybe like opening up for indexing. So how does that typically work? And you've talked a little bit about buy-in with the engineers, but what about buy-in with the rest of marketing?
Yeah, I love that. I actually have no success whatsoever at that ever. And the reason is, and this is part of my learnings from SurveyMonkey, like I learned so much there. So I joined the company at 100 employees. By the time I left, they had like 1,500 and went through all these iterations. And obviously the CEO passed away, and I dedicated my book to the CEO. You know, check out the introduction there of why I did. But the company went through all these iterations and different silos and different offices. And what I learned is that everyone has goals. Everyone has goals they set for themselves at the beginning of every quarter and the beginning of every year, and they don't care about your goals. So if I were to come in and be hired to really focus on SEO, the person that hires me couldn't care less if email was broken and destroyed. It wasn't a part of their goals. So yes, I may be able to come in and say, hey, you may want to tell the email person that they could do this here. Many times the incentives aren't aligned and they couldn't care less. So I'm always hired by people who are directly focused on SEO. If it's a VP of growth, they may not own those other marketing channels at all. They may dislike the people that own the other marketing channels and want them to suffer. Like I've seen all of that across the board. I worked with a company that I worked with a product team where the marketing team had their own website for press. Like that was all completely separate. I worked with a marketing team or a product team where they thought that everything that the marketing team did on paid advertising was disgusting and terrible.
Oh my gosh.
So like I'm hired to do something very specific. And I find that like when I offer to jump in those things, I'm actually getting to politics that hurt my efforts. So when I work at smaller companies and I'll talk to the executives, yes, they want everything to work. They want it all to come together. I can provide those little examples. Hey, have a CTA here, or I introduce them to an agency that I love working with, either for PR or for paid marketing or for social, like when those opportunities come up. But I do find at bigger companies, I'm hired for one thing and only one thing. And if I go out of my lane, then they get annoyed. So it's funny, but like those are the things I put in my book. It's really like around goals and like understanding everyone's goals. And I find many times engineers they're not at all gold on SEO. So therefore you have to get them to care to do something for you that doesn't actually benefit their bonus or benefit the way they're going to be measured. And that's more important than a win, because if you get someone to care about your goals and you can scratch their back and they'll scratch your back, that helps you further down the road.
Speaking of integrating or not integrating various forms of marketing, today's episode is brought to you by AdZuma and AdZuma Plus, as well as Ahrefs. I think between AdZuma and Ahrefs, you pretty much have everything handled between paid search, the data from paid search, and the data from paid search, and your paid search automation at AdZuma that then you can then implement into SEO at the end of the day with all of the great keyword data and tech crawl audits that you can do with Ahrefs. Do you still do audits, by the way, when you're coming in to consult?
I never really did. So the reason I've done audits, and when I have audits come up, like I'll do them. But one of the things I found, and this is the advantage I had of being in-house at SurveyMonkey for so many years, is I saw audits. And the audits are usually created from a deliverable standpoint where here's a bunch of things they should do, but then it's delivered to somebody who actually has to do it. And most of the times they're put away. I was actually even, I learned this not even from SEO. When I was doing international things at SurveyMonkey, I went to Germany and I went to the UK to do a bunch of research about those markets. And I came back and I wrote up a bunch of things for my boss that we should focus on. And then he circulated that internally, and someone sent back a McKinsey deck of McKinsey had done the same thing. Now, for anybody not familiar with McKinsey decks, those cost $500,000. So someone actually got a McKinsey deck, didn't do anything, and then Eli went to Germany and the UK and spent thousands of dollars to go learn the exact same thing the McKinsey deck had. So that's been my experience with SEO audits. If that is my be all and end all, I don't accomplish anything. So when I join a company and I partner with them on we're going to extract growth, of course I do pieces of the audit, but it's not one I'm going to deliver this audit to you after 3 months. It's really let's look at our crawl right now, and we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to look at competition from an audit standpoint, and then we're going to focus on that. So it's piecemeal. Eventually, there could be an actual audit that comes out of it, but I do find that big, and sometimes audits are meant to be as fat as possible. Those aren't very useful. And the McKinsey deck was 150 pages, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in the world, and not a single thing from it was ever done.
No one read it until they had to defend it. No one read it until they had to say, why did you hire this guy? We already paid for this.
Yeah. Oh, and they had this beautiful page in that beautiful McKinsey deck on SEO, which was completely wrong. So much for that.
There you go. I was just trying to think while you were talking. I can't remember the last time I delivered a big, fat, multi-page audit. Most of what I've done in the past, even 8 years, I would say, is auditing, but delivery is in prioritized tickets.
Yep.
Right? It's this is what we're working on. Here you go. Here's your JIRA tickets. Here's this ticket. Here's that ticket. And just getting those things in, and then, backing them up, right? Or working with the team. For any consultants or, even I always get consultants and agencies mixed up in my head because I have a boutique agency and I kind of see us as a group of consultants, is that, pre-qualify your clients. Just going back to what Eli said, can you get the job done? Is there buy-in, right? And even if you cannot do that 100% before you sign the contract, see what you can figure out, what can be done, and what can out of what can be done and what can be changed. Then what out of those fixes, what's going to be able to move the needle to get buy-in and to get champions within the company to communicate that accordingly, right? Maybe all we can do is change title tags. It sounds so novel, right? But it's just or so novice, but sometimes just the ability to change some title tags or some H1s or something like that can move the needle enough to get from below the fold to above the fold for some of the main terms where people are oh my God. And I'm hey, imagine if you would let us help you with this and that and so on and so forth. So really learning what can be done. If it's a smaller business, sometimes you can even log in yourself and make the changes, right? But once you get to, funded companies, enterprise, public companies, really look into what's doable, how much buy-in they have, and again, what can you can get done at the end of the day. Eli, I shared the book. I shared your Twitter. Should I share your book page itself? What would you rather share, your book page or your LinkedIn?
So I have a great website, productledseo.com, which I thank you, Wix, for helping make for me, so that anybody can check out that. That's just it brings you over to Amazon. But yeah, you can share LinkedIn, share Twitter, anything anybody wants. You can Google me. Actually, I never said this in a show before. Might as well bring this up. So for years, I've been able to do excellent SEO on my own name, Eli Schwartz. Mm-hmm. And I never had any competition, despite the fact that there was a world famous epidemiologist named Eli Schwartz in Israel. But he didn't know how to do SEO, and I was invited to conferences to speak on his behalf because I did better SEO than him. Well, this professor is actually the one leading the horse parasite research. And for the first time in my SEO career, I'm actually battling for results on my own name, because when people search for, I don't know, Invermectin or whatever it is, the horse parasite. So like, yes, he's out there doing good work and showing up for our shared name.
He has a knowledge panel right here, right?
Yeah.
So Eliza, is your first name Eliza, or is it Elijah? Eli. So Eli Schwartz, an Israeli physician known for his specialty in tropical diseases and travel medicine. Amazing. And then at the bottom, see results about Eli Schwartz, American econ. Oh, so that's not even you at the bottom.
That's not even me. Yeah, I lost my knowledge graph.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Jason Barnard and I talked about it. I saw you had him on last week.
Oh, you ever get mixed up for Barry? People ever mix you up with Barry Schwartz by any chance? Yeah. No. Okay.
Too distinctive.
No one mixes me up with anybody. There's no other Loren. Oh, well, actually, there's some Lorens at Shopify. But there's no other Lorens in the industry. Anyway, Eli, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. It's been great catching up. Really appreciate you jumping on today. Again, I highly recommend. I had some clients send me. I had one client, actually ex-client, CEO, send me a screen cap of he was reading your book, and you mentioned Search Engine Journal multiple times in the book, I believe. And he was sending me photos from his phone as he was reading all the times that you had brought us up. So thank you for that as well. And this book, I think the fact that I do hear more, and I have seen more non-SEOs reading it and sharing it, tells me that you're making a difference out there. So I'd like to thank Search Engine Journal, and I'd like to thank myself for giving you a chance for your writing. Because if we hadn't done that, this is butterfly effect. If we hadn't done that, you wouldn't have never published this book and made this much difference in the world.
Yeah, totally. And the reason I wrote the book is because I have conversations with executives, and they say, where can I read more about this? And executives don't want to go to podcasts, and they don't want to go to SEJ and read, blogs. They want a book, right? It's like, my ideas aren't new. They're just book ideas. It's different. And the one thing I want to say about SEJ and writing for SEJ is, I think I had this in the book. I had this experience at SurveyMonkey where I was advocating something on international, and I was trying to tell this engineer to do something. And he said, you're completely wrong. And he sends me a blog post from SEJ. And I was like, damn it, this blog post is contradicting me. And then I went and looked at it, and I wrote it. So I was like, my opinion changed, right? That's the way SEO is. It was probably related to TLDs or something like that. So your opinions change.
Over time they do. Reminder.
The realities change. Everything changes. It's just funny, to have that out there. Books are, hopefully my book is evergreen for a long time, because I didn't really want to write about things that are time bound and going to go out and get obsolete. But that's why executives look for the book. And that's why I wanted to put it out there. So there's something that they can feel they can point to and understand and give a higher level understanding of what SEO is, and how to think about it, and how to hire for it, and how to plan for it.
Amazing. So Eli, thanks again. Really appreciate you taking the time today. Thanks for all of our listeners and viewers who have tuned in for today's episode of the Search Engine Journal Show with Eli Schwartz. We've been talking about product-led SEO, and today's episode has been sponsored by Ahrefs and Adzuma. It's really been a pleasure, Eli. Anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Thank you again for everything SEJ does for the SEO world and for my own life and career.
Awesome. Great to hear. Great to see Baltimore representing University of Maryland. Did you go to Maryland around the same time that Under Armour was being started as an incubator there?
Probably.
Yeah. It's I think we're maybe around the same age, more or less. But yeah, it was always an interesting story to see that company start as a University of Maryland funded incubator project to become what it's become today.
Well, Sergey Brin also went to University of Maryland.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I had no idea. Boom. Done. Go Terps.
I remember when I was there, they had him down, but he wasn't as famous as he is now. So
amazing.
They had somebody else. Was it Dell? No. Did Dell go there?
I honestly can't remember. I went to Towson, which is part of the Maryland system, but it's like
I got an MBA from University of Baltimore, which is bought by Towson. So there we go.
I know. Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's University of Baltimore, Towson, or something like that. They're combined.
That's confusing. That's confusing.
Well, I was happy about that because Towson had a better brand name.
They do, yeah, a little bit. I was back. I was back in Baltimore last summer, and Ethan from Groove Commerce. Any chance?
I think so.
Yeah. So I had the chance to run into him and a couple of SEOs in Baltimore as well. I was walking around the harbor, Harbor East, all of those areas. Ethan Griffin from Groove Commerce. But I was walking around that area. It's really beautiful right now. It's really beautiful. So check it out next summer if you have a chance.
Absolutely.
All right. Cheers. Okay, that's enough Baltimore talk. Check out Product Led SEO if you get a chance, everybody. I dropped all of Eli's. Oh, one more question before we sign off. What's the story behind your Twitter handle 5LE?
No one's asked that in a long time. There was a friend of mine who was a very, very early employee at Facebook. He got himself a 3-letter Twitter handle. And this was before we went on and started recording. I talked about the old social media days. The Dig. Did we meet on Dig or Reddit or one of those things?
It was probably we were probably in a Dig group together, like digging each other's stuff.
Totally.
Top page.
I met some of my best SEO friends who used to be Dig people. So
I still have sites that rank because of the links that we got on Dig, like home improvement blogs and stuff like that. It's crazy.
I once sent an email to one of those sites and it said, "I'm responsible for a ton of your traffic. You should start paying me." But so way back when, when I was doing all the social media stuff, and I thought I knew everything about social media. So this guy was bragging about he had a 3-letter Twitter handle, and I was like, "Just give me a night. I'm gonna find a 3-letter Twitter handle that makes sense." And I got that one, sort of related to my name. The 5 is S, and then LE. Got
it. It works. Now I know why.
Yes.
Okay, not as complicated as I thought it would be. I thought it was code for something, but awesome.
Oh, it's 10 years old, and it was not a KPI for me. But when someone else told me he got one, I was like, I want to.
Hey man, it's bragging rights. Bragging rights. Done.
Exactly.
Eli, thanks again. Thanks to our viewers and listeners. It's been a great episode today. Everybody have a great weekend, and thanks again for watching and listening to the SEJ Show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Search Engine Journal Show. If you liked this episode, subscribe to our channel for so much more and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing.